Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Zach Erickson from Nintendo Dads. Today, I actually am really excited because we're going to be talking about something that is really important and timely, and we're going to be talking about, you may have noticed in the news, on your news feeds or whatever, we're going to talk about the fact that the International Statistical Classification of Diseases 11th edition, which is from the World Health Organization, it's also known as the ICD-11. They recently announced that they are putting gaming disorder, in fact, it's been published now, it's official. Gaming disorder is now considered a diagnosable mental condition or mental disorder. And I wanted to talk to you guys today about it because I think that, being Nintendo dads, it's something that is very relevant for us. As we are somebody out there who is encouraging video game playing and usage. What does it mean to have this be this gaming disorder, right? And so I wanted to talk about what does it actually mean? Specifically, because I think it's important, what would qualify and what wouldn't qualify. And also, is this even something to be worried about? Or is this something, how much weight do we need to put into this? Because I think that that's really important to think about. So, first off, the International Statistical Classification of Diseases, which is specifically, it's something that's used over in Europe mostly, which I think is important to pay attention to first. In North America, we don't use the ICD-11, we use what's called the DSM-5, which is basically it's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And essentially, it's like a book that everybody gets, psychologists, psychiatrists, everybody that is used to diagnose mental illness, mental disorders. It has very specific criteria for each disorder. I think the first thing to pay attention to is that a few years ago, the DSM-5 in North America came out, and there was something in there called Internet Gaming Disorder. It was placed under needs further research before we can make this a real thing. Right, so a couple of years ago, the consensus was, and this was specifically around internet gaming, but let's be real, for people who actually know gaming, there's differences and there's not, right? And so I would say, I guess the first thing is that there is not a lot of consensus and not a lot of agreement in the field of psychology, psychiatry, about if this is even a thing to begin with. So keep that in mind first off. So let's talk about what the definition of gaming disorder is according to the World Health Organization. And I'm just going to read this and I'm going to interpret it as we go, okay? So this is the text that is specifically from them. It says, gaming disorder is characterized by a pattern of persistent or reoccurring gaming behavior, digital gaming or video gaming, which may be online, i.e. over the internet, or offline. And then they give 3 different criteria in this. So basically they're just saying, hey guys, those are what video games are, right? They're just saying that it's about video gaming behavior. So number 1, impaired control over gaming. For example, the onset, frequency, intensity, duration, termination, context. So in other words, is there any lack of control or reduced control that a person has over their gaming behavior? How much, how little, when, for how long. Intensity, I think, is an interesting one, because depending on the game, right? I think that's, and these are all just examples, but that's something, so when you start, how often, how intense, how long, if you can stop, and where you are doing your gaming, right? So context, and when, and what other things need to be done. So just impaired control is the first one. Second one, increasing priority given to gaming to the extent that gaming takes precedence over other life interests and daily events, or daily activities. So you like games, therefore you increase their priority over things that maybe otherwise would be more important, or there are other life activities that you could be doing. Seems a little bit of a weird one, right? Kind of vague. And then the third one is continuation or escalation of gaming despite the occurrence of negative consequences. So in other words, you skip work or you stay up late playing Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and I don't know, right? And then all of a sudden you're tired the next day at work, or your job performance decreases. I think this one is really the crux of it, this one and the first one, right? So there's the impaired control, increasing priority, which I think that's bogus. I think you put in TV, you put in sports, you put in fantasy football, you put anything else in there other than somebody being super responsible all the time. It's kind of it's a weird one. I get it, but also I feel like this one a lot of times is so subjective that it's super vague. And then the third one, continuation of or escalation of gaming despite the occurrence of negative consequences. Okay, so far, so then what we have here is, so those are the three criteria. It also says the pattern, or the behavior pattern is of sufficient severity to result in significant impairment in personal, family, social, educational, occupational, or other areas of functioning. So in other words, this has to be so bad that it is influencing your life in multiple areas. It doesn't say multiple areas, but it should. Is it impacting your life in multiple areas in order to... That's how I would change the wording, I would say. And in fact, if I were to ever use this, I wouldn't just say, oh, my gaming is influencing my relationship with my parents, because then maybe that just has to do with the fact that your parents don't like video games. And that is not a good enough reason to give a mental disorder. So it's got to impact multiple areas and in a significant manner is how that's not what they're saying, that's what I'm saying, but anyways. The pattern of gaming behavior may be continuous or episodic and recurrent. So that's weird, right? So like maybe you binge play a game or something and then it goes away. But that's what they're saying. It may be continuous, nonstop, or it may be episodic and recurrent. Okay. The gaming behavior and other features are normally evident over a period of at least 12 months in order for a diagnosis to be assigned, although the required duration may be shortened if all diagnostic requirements are met and symptoms are severe. Okay, so basically what they've just said is, yeah, it's okay. Like, it needs to be at least 12 months. But if it's bad, it can be less. Well, what? That's that. As far as a diagnostic thing goes, that's, again, they're leaving a lot up to the discretion of the clinician, is what that tells me, right? So the psychologist, the psychiatrist, the doctor, whoever it is who's making this diagnosis, they're leaving it up to them. And which is weird, because what you want is a diagnostic tool to be specific enough and reliable enough to actually identify something between clinicians. And I think that is one of my big criticisms of this, is that it's vague enough that they're just leaving it open to other people. Because if you go to clinician A and they say, oh no, you wouldn't qualify for this, it's just, rein it in a little bit, you'll be fine. So here's why. There's a couple of different things. First off, even in the video on the World Health Organization's website about this, they say this is something that is in very few people. It does not impact everybody who plays video games. This is not the same thing. Let's look at all of those, right? Like, it's important to look at everything together in context, which I think is good. Also they're saying, well, why would you even put this in here in the first place? What their response is you want to have your diagnostic tools to reflect today's society. And also, in some areas, especially over in Europe, there are, and this, again, that being their context, right? They are in a place where they are wanting to give these people who are coming in with problematic gaming behavior what I would call gaming-related behavior issues, right? Like, I think that's a legitimate thing, is that just because we enjoy gaming doesn't mean that gaming can never be a problem in people's lives. And I think that's legitimate and it's real and we need to take that seriously. But is this gaming disorder the way of going around doing that, right? So there have been some criticisms, and I should actually at the top here as well give a lot of credit to, I think it was a day or two ago, Philip DeFranco, who is an awesome YouTuber. If you don't watch his show, what are you doing? Get over there. But he did a whole little piece on this, and I'll put a link in the show notes. But essentially, he kind of rounded up some of the criticisms on this here. So the first one I mentioned earlier is DSM-5, which is the North American equivalent, right? Classified this as needing further research. That is basically a huge criticism, is this is way too early. We don't have enough research on this. This is not backed up by any sort of peer-reviewed research and all of that. And so it's too early to even be saying this in the first place. And not only that, but there are significant implications of going out and saying, oh, gaming disorder, and then just having, I mean, even look at one of the other stories that I was considering covering, and maybe I will at some point, is this idea of gaming addiction, specifically around like Fortnite and things like that. It's interesting. Anyways, so there are implications for saying this too early. It's basically fear mongering is one of what maybe, again, those are my words, but I think that's possibly how you could deal with this term. Is that it's going to demonize too big of an area or issues here. Okay, so the next one, and this is actually around a psychologist named Anthony Bean, and he is both a clinician and a researcher, and he's actually come out and said gaming is a positive thing, and I think that that's actually something that we have covered a little bit before on the podcast, is that gaming can be a hugely positive thing. There are positive and negative aspects to gaming, and I think it's worth looking at what are the positive aspects of it in moderation, right? And I think that that's an important piece, is in moderation, what is the deal, right? So again, he's saying that, there are people who would classify themselves as addicted to video games. And here's the thing, too, is that just because you feel like your gaming behavior is maybe problematic or out of control does not necessarily mean that like going and giving you a diagnosis of addiction is even necessarily, it can cause its own issues as well, right? And so I think treating problematic gaming behavior as a symptom of a greater problem, I think, is actually a much better way of thinking about these kinds of things. One of the things that's important as well is that gaming can be used as a coping mechanism for dealing with anxiety and depression, right? That is something that has been helpful. We've heard about people on the show that have said that, right? That, we've been going through a hard time and life is hard, and here's this great game that I can play and escape for a little while and help get through some of these hard times. I think that's awesome. But at the same time, it's also important to look at gaming and say, okay, well, what is the balance between coping and escaping a little bit, or at least within moderation, again, versus completely avoiding reality, right? And I think that is maybe, again, the diagnostic criteria are not specific enough to even say this, right? And I would want to see some specificity and some clarifications, but that, I guess, is part of what it would say, or I guess, right, is that it is on a spectrum, right? It can be used as a coping mechanism. Also, people can do that too much. And I think that that's important to rein that in. So, the criteria, again, far too broad, and there is no differentiation. This is huge. There's no differentiation in the current diagnostic criteria that would say if it's mild, moderate, severe, right? So you just get gaming disorder, and whatever that means to you, who knows? Who knows what that means? That could be a really scary diagnosis. That could be, and so to have that mild, to say somebody that you have a mild case of gaming disorder or gaming addiction or whatever you want to call it, that is much different than to say severe. And I think that it's so important to have those kinds of things in there in order to be able to give context for why or for what the problem really is. And again, the label is premature. So this is, I don't know. So here's the thing to take away from this is, especially for the Nintendo Dads audience, you need to have moderation in everything, right? It's interesting because I had a roommate in university who I would come home after class and I would play some Smash. I think it was around the time that Brawl came out. We would play some Smash, like a good hour or two every day, right? And it was interesting because my roommate would come home and he would think, oh yeah, here's these guys playing video games again. How do you ever do anything else? And then he would sit and watch basketball videos on what I think YouTube was out then, right? That was what, 10 years ago? 11 years ago? Yeah, sure. He would watch basketball videos, right? And I was like, wow, okay, this is a double standard. And he would watch them for as long as we'd play Smash. or they would have, there are so many things that people do. There were some reports, and this is not part of the diagnostic tool, but problematically reporting, oh, this person plays over 20 hours of video games a week. And initially the shock value is like, whoa, wait, what? 20 hours? And yet then we say, oh yeah, but what is the average number of hours that people watch TV in the United States? Turns out it's 5 hours a day, right? Or 35 hours a week, which is, when you put that into context and you were saying, okay, well, gaming disorder, we can go after that, but what about Netflix disorder, right? Or what about just like binge watching TV series disorder? Or I think that if we were to look at Netflix or watching TV, then we would say, oh, well, this person is, this is a symptom. Maybe they're feeling depressed. Maybe they're lacking motivation, right? There's so many ways of kind of thinking about, or how we would think about that. And yet all of a sudden, if it's gaming, then, oh, well, it's a big deal, right? And I think that there is a clear bias towards video gaming in general. And I think that should not be used to justify things like this gaming disorder. But that doesn't mean, but our own bias of enjoying video games also should not be put in the way of us defending problematic video gaming behavior, right? If we are not teaching our children how to self-regulate, how to, monitor their own gaming, monitor if, I had an interaction with my son just yesterday playing the Splatoon 2 Octo expansion, which is super hard, and he was getting really angry, and I was like, okay, give me the Switch, you're not throwing the Switch across the room today, thank you very much. Which luckily has not happened, right? But playing through that expansion, I feel like I probably was at risk of that too. And so teaching kids to walk away, to regulate their time, to go outside and play, all of those things are important for normal development too. And they're important for adults. And so if you are using, I guess I would just say that this is an important issue in that we need to be monitoring our own, it needs to be in moderation. And I feel like I'm repeating myself at this point, but you get the idea. So I'm curious what you guys think. What are your thoughts about the whole video game addiction, gaming disorder issue? I think that it is a hot button issue. It is a good clickbait type thing, which I think is just crazy. But it's the reality, and I think that hopefully this is a healthy dose of reason and rational thinking. And if you guys want me to do more videos like this, let me know. I can definitely do that. Leave comments, leave questions. You can email us, nintendodads@gmail.com. All of those kinds of things. I'm going to be wanting to do more videos like this. So if you want the real talk or whatever, that's awesome. You can also go over to Patreon, support us over there. And yeah, you guys are amazing. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.